Greetings, everyone. I'm Mar. Once again, this is my opinion. As you can tell from the title up there, I am finally tackling the third and final episode of the 1997 miniseries, The Shining, adapted from the Stephen King novel by the master of horror himself and directed by Mick Garris. Of course, starring Rebecca De Mornay, Steven Weber, Melvin Van Peebles, Pat Hingle, among others. Now, last year, around Halloween, I tackled the first two parts. I was going to get to this part, but of course, that was when I moved to my current abode, so I didn't have the time to sit down, watch it, and do all that because I was too busy packing, and we just kind of got lost in the shuffle. And as time went by, I'm like, I'll tackle it at the beginning of this Halloween. And here I am. Now, this episode picks up where the previous one left off, with the questionable CGI on the topiary animals. They look like they're going to go attack Danny, but the parents get outside in time, and it kind of looks like it's a figment of Wendy's imagination. Well, things happen sometimes. Now, this episode adapts the rest of the story following this, where we slowly see that the hotel is getting its hooks into Jack Torrance even more, driving him further and further towards the brinking, and even without any alcohol in his system, he's going to start getting violent because his violent tendencies are coming there, and he actually gets physical with Wendy. He pushes her when they have an incident where the elevator turns on and goes up and down, and of course he's still trying to play it off like he didn't see that, he didn't hear that. But it's kind of hard to do that when your wife goes into the elevator and throws some sparkly confetti and a mask out and be like, is this a figment? Kind of hard to blow that off. Well, Jack ends up in the bar, and it's been fully stocked by the hotel. He starts drinking, and then he ends up at a party where all the ghosts from the hotel's past are there, or at least a good portion of the ones that never actually checked out, so like Hotel California. Well, he ends up talking to a couple of them, especially Dilbert Grady and the original owner of the hotel, and they're the main ghosts he interacts with. He interacts with a female ghost at one point. And this, of course, is where we get our Stephen King cameo, where he is the band leader in makeup, but even under the makeup, we can tell it's King. I love the mustache they give him, too. And I love the period piece that they have him leading the band in, the Bugle Boy of Company B, if I remember the name of it. And the nice little trivia is that he actually has a name other than just band leader, and it's Gage Creed. Gotta love a good Pet Sematary reference in there. Now, these two entrust Jack with a job from the hotel's upper management, and that is he needs to correct his wife and son, and that his son is bringing in an outside party. Now, since this is a show made for network television, they can't drop any hard R words to begin with an N, so they use another phrase that gets the concept across. I'm not going to repeat it here because it technically is a racial slur in this context, but you get it. So the whole thing is still there, but not as bad. Now, Danny, he tries to go out and interrupt everything, but this is where the hotel goes from pictures in a book, nothing can harm me here, to having fed off the energies from the three family members, especially Danny. Things can now hurt you, especially Danny. I mean, we've seen it can hurt him in select spots, but now the hotel's a lot more energized, it's fully awake, it can hurt you more. Of course, this is where we get the guy in the dog mask. I know I brought it up in the first two parts. There's not a whole lot to bring up here other than the differences between this one and the Kubrick film. But this is one that I remember. We do see a guy in a dog mask in that one, but he doesn't keep Danny from leaving the room. Now, this could be scary, but in the miniseries, this whole guy with the dog mask doesn't really come off as scary. But to the character in the moment, especially character Danny's age, it definitely would be scary. Now, is before he's in the room is when he sends a message to Dick that he needs him to come. Like, Dick told him, like, if you ever see anything, you ever need my help, to send a blast my way. And of course, Dick is having the time of his life in Miami. We see him at a diner where we get a cameo. We get a Shawnee Smith as a waitress cameo, which I did not realize that was her the first time I saw this miniseries. And it's been almost 20 years since the first time I saw it, so it slipped my mind. And he really feels it. And Melvin Van Peebles really sells the fact that it has hit him hard. I mean, just like in the first episode when he got hit with it, here he really sells it from a distance. And he tries his best to get there, but he gets delayed. Now, here they don't really mention if it's the hotel delaying it, but they play up that a little bit more in the novel. But I guess you could put it as subtext. And of course, Dick is all like, oh, great. Great. And of course, this delay allows Jack to get schlockered thanks to the hotel. And it allows him to start attacking Wendy and Danny. And of course, this starts when Wendy goes to check on him. And the hotel's put so many thoughts about his family obstructing his career in his mind, plus the alcohol, that first thing he does, Jack attacks Wendy. And I gotta say, Steven Weber sells this pretty well. Now, his performance in this miniseries is not as iconic as Jack Nicholson's in The Shining, but it's kind of hard to beat out Jack Nicholson in that regard. Even though I will always say, when it comes to the character of Jack Torrance, Kubrick's adaptation bastardizes it. Part of that is the writing, part of that is Kubrick's direction, and part of that is Jack's performance. Jack, as an actor, we know could probably have done justice to it, but the material and how it was adapted in that film, nah. And in this miniseries, even though, like I said, he's not as iconic, Weber is closer to how he is in the book. So us seeing his slow decline in the first couple episodes to the hotel finally getting its hooks fully in him here, Weber does a pretty good job. If there's any complaint around it, it is the way the episode is shot, because even though Mick does what he can, you can definitely tell this is still a 90s TV miniseries with the restrictions and the budget constraints. Which, remember budget constraints, I'm going to get to that when we talk about the finale. He gets knocked out, it's thrown inside the fridge. Familiar with the story from Kubrick's adaptation, remember that. Of course, he gets let out by the ghosts, but instead of an axe, he gets his hand on a roque mallet. So that whole thing about roque actually pays off here. He goes and attacks everybody. He actually hurts Wendy. Unlike the Kubrick one, where she barely gets a scratch on her, here she actually gets hit. Just watching it was like, oh, that made me hurt. It gets hit in the back, it's hitting the knee, it's like, yee. Now, I don't remember if they mentioned it in the book, but I know the follow-up Dr. Sleep does, that she had chronic pain in the parts she gets hit for the rest of her life. I remember she was in a back brace, too, or had back issues. Here, they don't really touch on it, but it's a miniseries. You can't really touch on it that much, even with the extended time. That's one of those things you gotta leave to the imagination. And of course, unlike the Kubrick film, once Halloran does show up after much delays and having to rent a snowblower, where we get, not snowblower, a snowmobile, where we get a Sam Raimi cameo, he gets, to paraphrase from Friday, he gets knocked the fuck out. Now, my issue with how he gets knocked out is the way it is constructed, because it just seems like, what? It makes much more sense in the novel and in how he gets killed in the Kubrick film, where it's a surprise attack and he gets knocked out because it's the mallet or the axe to the center of mass, and then maybe another whack for good measure. Here, as I put it in my original one, Jack just comes out of nowhere and it's like, you just instituted your own beating, come on down, you are the next one on Supermarket Sweep. So it's like, Dick, why are you just standing there like you are a minion and one of those swashbuckling films where you can tell the extras are just standing around waiting for their cue to go and attack the person or getting caught by the guys monologuing. Why are you doing that instead of trying to, actively get out of the way? I mean, obviously, I don't think you're going to be able to overpower him alone due to the age thing, and in fact, the hotel's probably going to throw something in there. But theoretically, you could always use your shine to, stun him or something, but it's like, you can get away. It's like that always was a gripe of mine. Every time I watch it, it just still looks as bad. I know they had to have had the runtime because it's a miniseries, but still, it's like, you could have gotten out of the way, man. Oh. He gets knocked out. Now, before that, when Wendy is in their quarters, we get a scene that Here's Johnny scene. It kind of drew from in the book where Jack is trying to break in. Now, the only good line that's at least worthy of mention that Jack says in this whole scene is when he's going to go try to break down the bathroom door, and that is where he's like, "Papa Bear's coming." That's not the right phrasing of it, but it's like, oh yeah, that works. This is also not as iconic as Jack Nicholson's "Little Pigs, Little Pigs." But if they did that, they'd be like, oh, they're copying dialogue. But they could have done something derivative, but at least the Papa Bear makes sense in this context because it's the whole self-implosion of the family unit here. Here you can definitely tell a set is made on a TV budget with the doors, but I think it also kind of stands out considering Jack Nicholson in his film also bust down real doors because he was a volunteer firefighter at one point. But that's a nitpick. And of course, Jack goes to follow his son, and he finds him, and this is where we see them being really true to the spirit of the ending of the novel. Whereas in the Kubrick film, Jack gets lost in the topiary maze and ends up freezing to death. Here, he finds his son. It looks like he's going to kill him. His son starts talking him down. And this is where we get the inner struggle between Jack in the hotel. And this is where we really see that the character of Jack Torrance is a little bit of a sympathetic character, because even though the hotel still has its hooks in him, he is fighting it at this point. He's telling Danny to get out of there. And of course, Danny stays there with him here. It's been a while since I've read the books. I don't remember if Danny runs away right away or doesn't run away until after he does what he does here. He points out the hotel one fatal flaw. They had one fatal flaw here. And that was they forgot about the boiler. And there's actually a chapter title in the book, That Which Was Forgotten, that leads up to this. But they, with some of the editing, especially when they come back from commercial, where the commercial breaks are, you can tell that they were subtly hinting at it here. And it would make sense. There's the whole Chekhov's gun principle that you don't introduce something and not pay it off. To apply it here, you don't introduce a boiler that has issues to where you don't want to release the steam once it gets over a certain set amount, even though it's rated for that because of the age of the boiler. Don't want to talk up the importance of making sure you release it without paying it off. And here comes the payoff, because it's going to be the third act of this episode thing, where the ghost forgot, Jack forgot, everyone forgot until now. And that Chekhov's gun it has basically 99% of the pounds per square inch on the trigger, and it's about to go. And once the ghosts and Jack realize what's going on, oh, they have the reaction you would expect of them. They go down there. The two ghosts that are basically Jack Torrance's wranglers are telling them, hey, you got to turn it. And of course, Jack does let off a little bit of the steam. Of course, by this time, Wendy and Dick are all up and they're trying to get out of there. They're all getting out of there. Of course, Danny is helping his father a little bit. If I remember right, there's nothing like this in the book, but this is a nice little way to pad out the miniseries by also adding to his sympathy as a character. Where he's fighting off the ghosts, Danny's helping him a little bit with his shine. And even though the ghosts are trying to get him to release it, he pushes it back on, and once it hits midnight, masks off, as it were. Now, I know they did the best they could with the budget, but there is a lot of flaws with how they depict the Overlook blowing up. It's more like the boiler explodes, it catches fire, the fire spreads. It's not really an explosion. I mean, the most damage caused by the boiler exploding other than the fire is that the floor cracks. Which I know TV miniseries budget, but it just doesn't look the best. But it's one of those things that you got to give them at least a little bit of credit that it at least sells the job. That you can say this is the beginning of the fire. Maybe there was an additional explosion later on as it spread and caught any flammable stuff. Or maybe it just destroyed the lower levels and back part of it. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could look at it, but it doesn't do the job it could have. But even with that, it, like I said, it does get it across, just could have been better. Now, there is an epilogue. Now, in the book, the epilogue is it's months later. They're at another resort. They're healing, when Wendy's dealing with her issues from the rogue mallet, as is Dick. And of course, they're got to deal with the fact that there might be some lingering PTSD with the kid. But it ends on a nice little moment where Dick and Danny are fishing. Here, it actually skips ahead many, many years. And this is how we actually pay off the whole thing about why Danny's imaginary friend Tony is named Tony. And a little plot point from the book where Danny realizes that, and the audience finally gets, oh, that's why. And we see that even though he's only seen Tony from a distance, Tony is essentially a reflection of an older him. Because here, we get a flash forward where Danny is graduating from high school. Wendy and Dick are there to see him walk, and he's graduating with high honors. And it is Tony, his actor playing him. That actor here would be Will Hornell. Or Horneff, excuse me. And he does a decent job for this little scene. And the little touch I like is that in the distance, Danny sees the spirit of his father. It's a nice little moment there. Now, to add the little codex here that not only is he sympathetic, but he actually redeems himself a bit more, that's a nice little touch there. Now, if I remember right, Dr. Sleep has kind of like a similar moment where he kind of senses the presence of his father there. But it's been about a while since I've read the book, so don't 100% quote me on it. But to go off of that, this works as an ending for the miniseries. But if King was going to go for this is what happened years later, Dr. Sleep kind of makes that null and void. Even if you've only seen the movie, you can read along the stuff they have to see like, yeah, this definitely did not happen in the world of the books. Although I will say that in the initial aftermath, they did get a happy ending. It's just Danny, it took him years and years to 100% get his happy ending, which, mild spoiler for Dr. Sleep if you haven't read or seen it, he does get a pretty decent happy ending in the end. I mean, he finds more family, which, even though I say the whole thing about him being sympathetic, it is a little bit of a sleazeball move for us to find out that Jack actually cheated on Wendy. But granted, it was when he was in the big part of his alcoholism, but he still did it. But retroactively for Danny to find out he has a sister he didn't know about, and by extension he has a niece and more extended family, it does allow him to have his happy ending. Even if he just stays a bachelor the rest of his life, it does allow for that happy ending. So there's a little bit of applause there. Now, this episode, it has my main issue with this miniseries as a whole, and that is that it should have been a two-parter instead of a three-parter. There's parts where it pads out, and you can definitely still read into it the fact that this is King's little return volley to Kubrick and how he bastardized the story, whereas that one included a lot of good moments from the book, some of them with Kubrick's twist on it for his plot, but it only included the ones that were necessary. Here it includes just about every little moment. Now, some parts are cut out, like I mentioned in the episode that it included. Ullman only has one moment in the whole miniseries, and it's a flashback, where it's like, really? If you were just going to do the flashback, you should not have included the character as like an actual on-screen character, just a off-screen one. and then every other little thing. Like the elevator scene works in the book, but here I think it's more the way that it's shot. It doesn't come across the best. Some of the lighting in the other scenes I think doesn't work, but I think it's also with the framing and positioning of the camera. But considering that the whole thing definitely is filmed like a 90s miniseries, it's to be expected. I think that he could have worked with lights and shadows a bit more here, but I think that's me expecting a little bit more of a cinematic experience from a made-for-TV miniseries, which is filmed more like a TV show than it is a movie, or at least like that halfway point. But it's serviceable. It's one of those shows that I don't really see myself watching all that often. I mean, I've had this DVD for over 10 years, and I've only watched it twice. That should tell you. Probably won't watch it again in the immediate future until I actually reread the book again. But if you are a fan of Stephen King and a fan of the book like I am, and you are someone who despised Kubrick's film, like me, where you can look past the bastardization and still enjoy the film for what it is, and you're more like in King's position, how he was before the Doctor Sleep movie was made, I'd say give it a watch. You might have the same issues I do, where it's too overly long and and of course by that extension it means we've never had a good adaptation of the first Shining. But either way, I hope you enjoyed this little review of the Shining miniseries. Sorry it took a year to get this part out. I'm sorry there's not a lot of continuity with stuff I mentioned in the previous two ones, but I wasn't going to sit down and watch those two ones just to remember that stuff. There's not really much else to say when it comes to trivia, other than Halloran's Flight was the Denver area code. John Durbin was the one who played Horace Derwent. That's about it, actually. So, till next time, everybody.